The letter trembled in Serafina's hands, ink-bleeding secrets she'd prayed would stay buried. Outside her chamber, the court prepared for tonight's assembly. Champagne chilling, gossip sharpening. Inside, her perfect world cracked down the middle. 10 years of standing beside Duke Alistair Crowe, 10 years of smiling through his coldness, and this was her reward. But as she pressed her palm against the cool window glass, watching nobles arrive in their carriages, something shifted behind her ribs. Not heartbreak. Something harder. Something that tasted like war. If you're ready to watch a duchess become a queen, stay until the end. Like this video and comment your city so I can see how far Serafina's story travels. The morning Serafina's life began to unravel started like every other, with the pretense of perfection. She woke at dawn in the east wing of Crowe Manor, in a bed too large for one person, but fitting for a duchess who slept alone. The silk sheets were the color of champagne, expensive and cold. Through the tall windows she could see the formal gardens stretching toward the iron gates, every hedge trimmed to geometric precision, every flower bed a study in controlled beauty. Nothing wild, nothing left to chance. Serafina sat up, her dark hair falling over her shoulders in waves. She'd learned to tame by the time she was 16. 28 now, and some days she barely recognized the girl who'd walked down that cathedral aisle wearing white and promises. The girl who'd believed in fairy tales. Her lady's maid, Celeste, entered without knocking, a privilege earned through 8 years of discretion and perfectly pressed gowns. "Good morning, Your Grace." Celeste moved to the windows, drawing back the heavy curtains with practiced efficiency. "The Duke requests your presence at breakfast." Serafina's fingers paused on the buttons of her nightgown. "He's still here?" "In the blue dining room, my lady. Arrived from town an hour ago." Which meant Alistair had been at his apartments in the city again. 3 nights this week. But Serafina's face revealed nothing as she rose, bare feet silent on imported rugs that cost more than most families earned in a year. "The ivory dress," she said, "with the high collar." Celeste knew better than to comment on the choice. Severe, formal, armor disguised as fashion. 20 minutes later, Serafina descended the grand staircase, every inch the duchess the court expected. Her dress whispered against marble floors. Her posture could balance books. Her expression suggested nothing more troubling than deciding between tea and coffee. She found Alistair in the blue dining room, reading the morning papers with the detached interest of a man who owned half the countryside and influenced most of Parliament. He didn't look up when she entered. "Good morning." Her voice carried across the room, pleasant, neutral, empty of need. "Serafina." He acknowledged her the way he might acknowledge decent weather. "Coffee's fresh." She poured herself a cup, watching steam curl toward the painted ceiling. The dining room was one of her favorites, all pale blue walls and white molding, windows overlooking the rose garden. Beautiful and impersonal, like everything else in their marriage. "You're back early," she said, adding cream with a steady hand. "Parliament recess." He turned a page. "The Havishire bill needs attention." Politics. Always politics. Alistair Crowe had built his reputation on power, consolidating it, wielding it, never letting it slip. At 42, he carried authority like other men carried pocket watches, always aware of its weight, always checking its worth. Serafina took her seat across from him, the table wide enough to suggest they lived in different countries. "The Ashbournes are hosting their autumn ball next week," she said, slicing into a pear she had no intention of eating. "We're expected to attend." Something flickered across Alistair's face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "Of course." He folded his paper with sharp creases. "Appearances matter." The irony wasn't lost on her. Their entire marriage was an appearance, a strategic alliance between the Crowe fortune and the Vale family name, arranged when she was 19 and desperate to save her father's crumbling estate. She'd been so young enough to think companionship might grow from compromise, that respect might bloom from duty. 10 years later, she knew better. "Will you be returning to the city tonight?" she asked, because the script required her to care. "Probably." He stood, already reaching for his coat. "Business doesn't stop because Parliament does." Business. The word he used for everything she wasn't allowed to know about. He paused at the door, glancing back almost as an afterthought. "You look well, Serafina." "Thank you." He left. The room felt larger without him in it. Serafina sat in the silence, staring at her untouched breakfast. This was her life. This beautiful, hollow cage. And she'd learned to accept it, hadn't she? Learned to find purpose in running the estate, in maintaining the social connections that kept the Crow name shining. Learned to stop expecting her husband to look at her like she was anything more than a particularly useful piece of furniture. She was good at it now. The performance, the smile. But sometimes, in moments like this, the weight of it all pressed against her ribs like something trying to break free. "Your Grace?" Serafina looked up to find Celeste hovering in the doorway, holding a silver tray. "This arrived for you, from Lady Pemberton." Serafina took the envelope, recognizing the elaborate seal. Catherine Pemberton, her closest friend, though friendship among duchesses was a careful thing, full of propriety and proper distance. She broke the seal, expecting an invitation or some bit of gossip. Instead, she found 3 lines in Catherine's precise handwriting. "We need to talk. Not here, not anywhere public. The gardens at Pemberton House this afternoon. Come alone, Sarah. Please." The informal name, Sarah, sent a chill down her spine. Catherine never broke protocol, never showed emotion in writing where servants might see. Serafina read the note twice, searching for hidden meaning in the spaces between words. Found nothing but urgency and something that felt like fear. "No reply needed," she told Celeste, watching the maid retreat. She should feel curious, concerned maybe. Instead, she felt that strange sensation again, the one from this morning, like something shifting beneath the surface of her carefully constructed world, like the first crack in ice, right before it shatters completely. The Pemberton estate sat 3 miles north, close enough that Serafina could take her carriage without raising questions. She told the driver to wait by the gate and entered the gardens alone, as requested. Catherine found her by the fountain, an elaborate marble thing with cherubs that had always struck Serafina as slightly obscene. "You came!" Catherine's relief was obvious, unguarded in a way that immediately put Serafina on edge. This woman had survived 20 years in high society by never showing her cards. Seeing her like this felt wrong, like watching a statue bleed. "Your note suggested I should." Serafina kept her voice light, but she was already cataloging details, the shadows under Catherine's eyes, the way her hands twisted in her skirt. "What's happened?" Catherine glanced toward the house, checking for watching eyes. "How much do you trust me?" "More than most." The truth, surprisingly. "Catherine, you're frightening me." "Good. You should be frightened." Catherine pulled something from her pocket, a folded paper, edges worn like it had been handled many times. "I've been debating whether to show you this for 3 weeks, but after last night at Lady Morrison's dinner—" "I wasn't at Lady Morrison's dinner." "Exactly." Catherine pressed the paper into Serafina's hands. "Alistair was, with Lyra Ashbourne, and the way they looked at each other, Sarah, it wasn't business." The world tilted slightly. Serafina heard the words, understood them intellectually, but they refused to connect to anything real. Alistair and Lyra Ashbourne, the woman who'd been circling court politics like a shark for the past year, all calculated charm and dangerous ambition. "That's not—" Serafina started, then stopped. "Not what? Not possible? Not allowed? Not part of their arrangement?" "Read it," Catherine said quietly. "I found it in Lord Pemberton's study. He's been corresponding with certain members of Parliament, the ones allied with the Ashbourne faction. That letter was mixed in with the others. I think someone wanted it found, wanted to start rumors circulating." Serafina unfolded the paper with hands that had forgotten how to be steady. The handwriting was Alistair's. She'd recognize that sharp, efficient script anywhere. The letter was addressed to no one, dated 3 months ago, and what it contained. "The arrangement suits us both. Your influence in Parliament for my support of your family's interests. But this has become more than politics, hasn't it? When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something beyond power. You've given me that. I cannot stop thinking about Tuesday night." Serafina stopped reading. Her vision had gone strange, edges blurring like she was viewing the world through water. "There's more," Catherine said, and she sounded very far away. "Letters. Witnesses who've seen them together. Sarah, this isn't just an affair. Lyra Ashbourne is using it to manipulate policy, to push through legislation that benefits her family's shipping interest. She's playing him, and he's He's what? Seraphina's voice came out sharper than intended. Foolish enough to fall for it? Weak enough to be seduced away from his carefully managed life? Catherine flinched. I'm sorry. I know this is... What? Seraphina laughed, and it sounded broken even to her own ears. Devastating, humiliating, a disaster for my reputation? She looked down at the letter again, at words that proved her husband had given someone else the things he'd never offered her. Affection, passion, wanting. All of that, Catherine said softly, but also dangerous. If Lyra is manipulating him politically, if this becomes public scandal, the damage won't just be personal. The Ashbournes are connected to Lord Blackwood's faction, the ones who've been pushing for commercial reform that would hurt traditional landowners. If Alistair is compromised, the court will tear him apart. Seraphina finished the thought mechanically. Politics. Even betrayal came down to politics in their world. She should feel something. Rage, maybe. Grief. Instead, she just felt very cold and very clear, like the part of her that used to feel things had finally given up and walked away. What do you want me to do with this? She asked, holding up the letter. Catherine looked at her strangely. I thought you'd want to confront him, or leave him, or something. And go where? Seraphina smiled, and even she could feel how wrong it looked. With what? My father's estate is mortgaged to the Crow fortune. My title is married to his. I have no money of my own, no property, no legal standing beyond being the Duke's wife. She folded the letter carefully, precisely. I appreciate the warning, Catherine. Truly. But I need to think about this. Sarah, I need to think, she repeated, and this time Catherine heard the brittleness beneath the words. They embraced briefly, awkwardly. Then Seraphina walked back to her carriage with the letter burning a hole in her pocket and the taste of something bitter on her tongue. The ride back to Crow Manor passed in a blur. Seraphina stared out the window at familiar countryside, fields and farms and villages where people lived simple, uncomplicated lives, where men cheated because of passion or boredom, not political maneuvering, where women could cry or scream or break things without worrying about social standing. She envied them, desperately. Back home, she dismissed Celeste early and locked herself in her private sitting room, the one space in this entire manor that was truly hers. She read the letter again and again, memorizing every word, every casual endearment that Alistair had never thought to offer his wife. I cannot stop thinking about Tuesday night. What had they done Tuesday night? While Seraphina had been here, managing his household, maintaining his reputation, playing her part in their perfect performance, she found herself at her writing desk, pulling out the household ledgers she'd kept meticulously for 10 years. Evidence of her own worth measured in balanced accounts and successful dinner parties and charitable donations that kept the Crow name spotless. What a fool she'd been. Thinking competence might earn love, that perfection might earn something, anything. The knock at her door came after dark. Seraphina? Alistair's voice clipped with impatience. I'm leaving for the city. I wanted to let you know. Of course he did. Courtesy. Always courtesy, the cheap substitute for caring. She opened the door, and maybe something in her face looked different because he actually paused, actually looked at her like she was more than a fixture. Are you well? He asked. Fine. The lie came easily after 10 years of practice. Safe travels. He nodded, already turning away, already thinking about whoever waited for him in the city. Alistair. Her voice stopped him. The Ashbourne ball. Next week. We should discuss strategy. Lyra Ashbourne is ambitious, and her family's legislation is handled. He cut her off with the casual dismissiveness of a man who'd never considered his wife might have useful opinions. Don't trouble yourself with politics, Seraphina. Focus on the social aspects. Don't trouble yourself. As if she were a child. As if the past 10 years of supporting him, advising him quietly, managing the connections that kept him in power meant nothing. Of course, she said. Forgive me. He left. She heard his carriage pull away, horses clattering on cobblestones, carrying him toward his other life. His real life, apparently. Seraphina closed the door and walked back to her desk. The letter lay there, mocking her with its intimacy. She should burn it. Pretend she'd never seen it. Go back to her comfortable numbness, her careful performance. Instead, she pulled out a fresh piece of paper and began to write. Names, connections. Every person in court who owed the Ashbournes favors, every alliance they'd cultivated, every piece of legislation they'd pushed. If this was a game, if Lyra Ashbourne thought she could manipulate power through seduction, then it was time someone reminded her that power had other sources. And Serafina, despite a decade of playing the perfect Duchess, hadn't forgotten everything the Vale family had taught her about survival. The clock struck midnight. Serafina kept writing, filling pages with strategy, with countermoves, with the careful architecture of revenge dressed as politics. Somewhere in the city, her husband slept in another woman's arms. Here, in the manor that bore his name, his wife stopped being a duchess and became something else entirely, something dangerous. The next morning brought rain, the cold, persistent kind that turned the world gray and made Serafina's mood feel almost appropriate. She took breakfast alone again, surrounded by newspapers that mentioned Alistair's name in 3 different articles, his influence on the Havishire Bill, his expected support for commercial reform, his close working relationship with several key members of Parliament, including, she noticed, Lord Ashbourne, Lyra's father. How convenient. How tidy. An affair disguised as political alliance, or political alliance disguised as affair. Either way, Lyra had positioned herself perfectly. Serafina had to admire the strategy, even as it made her want to put her fist through the expensive china. Your Grace? Celeste appeared with the day's correspondence. And a visitor. Lady Pemberton is here, if you're receiving. Catherine again. Serafina almost smiled. Her friend knew her too well, knew she wouldn't let this go quietly. Show her to the green parlor. And Celeste? I'll need my afternoon open. No appointments. Catherine was pacing when Serafina entered, her usual composure badly frayed. I couldn't sleep, she said without preamble. I keep thinking about what I showed you, about what it means. And Sarah, you need to be careful. The Ashbournes don't play gentle games. Neither do I. Serafina closed the door firmly. Sit down. Tell me everything you know about Lyra Ashbourne. Catherine blinked. What? Everything. How she came to court, who sponsors her, what she wants, who her enemies are. You're better connected to court gossip than I am, so tell me. Slowly, Catherine sank into a chair. You're not going to confront Alistair. Why would I? Serafina took the seat across from her, hands folded in her lap like they were discussing tea selections. He'll deny it, or worse, he'll admit it and expect me to accept it quietly. Men like Alistair don't change because their wives ask them to. Then what? I'm going to destroy her. Serafina said it calmly, like announcing the weather. Lyra Ashbourne thinks she can use my husband to climb to power. Fine. Let her think she's won. But I'm going to dismantle her piece by piece, and when I'm done, she'll wish she'd chosen a different duke to seduce. Catherine stared at her. Sarah, that's dangerous, vindictive, beneath me? Serafina leaned forward. Catherine, I've spent 10 years being the perfect duchess. Polite, loyal, invisible. And where has it gotten me? A husband who can't even be bothered to hide his affair properly. A court that sees me as decoration. A life so empty I barely remember what wanting something feels like. Her voice cracked on the last word. She swallowed hard, forced control back into place. I won't be invisible anymore, she said quietly, and I won't be used. So either help me or don't. But don't try to talk me into accepting this. The silence stretched between them, broken only by rain against windows. Finally, Catherine reached into her bag and pulled out a leather journal. Lord Pemberton keeps notes. About everyone important. I've been copying relevant pages. She opened it, revealing pages of neat handwriting. Lyra Ashbourne, age 26, unmarried daughter of Lord Ashbourne. Educated in France, rumored to have had an affair with a married comte that ended badly. Returned to England 2 years ago, immediately began cultivating influence among the reformist faction in Parliament. Enemies? Serafina asked. The traditional landowners, obviously. Anyone who opposes her father's commercial interests. And, Catherine hesitated, there are whispers about her methods. Men she's gotten close to, all conveniently positioned to help her family's agenda. Your husband isn't the first. But I'm the first wife to fight back. Serafina smiled, and it felt sharp. Tell me about the autumn ball. Who will be there? They spent the next hour mapping alliances, identifying weaknesses, planning moves and counter-moves like generals preparing for battle. Catherine's initial shock faded into something like excitement, the thrill of having a purpose beyond managing households and making polite conversation. This could work, Catherine said finally, if we're careful, if we move slowly. No. Serafina stood, pacing to the window. Slowly gives Lyra time to consolidate. Slowly gives Alistair time to become more compromised. We have one advantage right now. They don't know we know, so we use it fast before they see us coming. The ball is in 5 days. Perfect. Serafina turned back, her mind already racing ahead. Public enough that everyone important will be there. Formal enough that propriety will keep things contained. And at the Ashbourne estate where Lyra will feel safe, confident. You want to expose them at our own party? Catherine's eyes widened. Sarah, that's a declaration of war. Serafina nodded. Good. Let them know exactly who they're dealing with. She walked Catherine out an hour later, their plans made, their alliance sealed. Standing in the doorway, watching her friend's carriage disappear into the rain, Serafina felt something she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Direction. The cold, clean certainty of someone who'd stopped pretending to care what broke. She went back inside, back to her sitting room, and began writing letters. To the Duchess of Havershire, asking for her support on a certain matter of court politics. To Lord Blackwood's wife, suggesting tea and a discussion about reform legislation. To 6 different ladies she'd cultivated carefully over the years. Women who owed her favors. Women who understood that power among duchesses was its own currency. Each letter carefully worded, each one planting seeds, building alliances, creating a network of influence that had nothing to do with her husband's name. By evening, her hand cramped from writing, but she had 20 letters ready for tomorrow's post. 20 moves in a game Lyra Ashbourne didn't even know had started. The door opened without knocking. Alistair, back earlier than expected, his coat wet from rain. I forgot some papers, he said, barely glancing at her. Then he noticed the letters. Writing to friends? Just correspondence. She kept her voice light, even as her heart hammered. How was the city? Productive. He gathered documents from his desk, the one in her sitting room that he rarely used but claimed anyway. I'll be back tomorrow night. We should discuss the Ashbourne ball. Now he wanted to discuss it. Now that it was convenient for him. Of course, she said. I've been thinking about what to wear. The blue silk, he said absently. The one with the silver beading. You look... He paused, actually looking at her for once. You look particularly well tonight, Serafina. Different, somehow. Because she was different. Because she'd stopped being his perfect, invisible wife and become his enemy instead. Thank you, she said, and smiled the smile she'd perfected over 10 years of lying. He left again. The door closed. Serafina looked down at her letters, at the evidence of her first real defiance. Then she rang for Celeste and began preparing for war. The next 3 days passed in a blur of strategic movement. Serafina attended every social gathering she could justify, her smile bright, her conversation light. She laughed at mediocre jokes, admired boring children, and dropped casual mentions of the upcoming Ashbourne ball into every conversation. Such an important event. Lyra has such influence these days, doesn't she? I do hope the weather holds. Wouldn't want anything to spoil such a significant evening. Planting expectations, building anticipation, making sure everyone who mattered would be there to witness what came next. She met with the Duchess of Havershire for tea. 2 hours of delicate conversation that ended with an understanding. Support for certain social initiatives in exchange for the Duchess's presence at key moments during the ball. She had lunch with Catherine and 3 other ladies, women who'd been overlooked and underestimated for years, women who were ready to watch someone shake the foundations of their carefully controlled world. And through it all, she played the perfect Duchess. Dutiful. Harmless. Not worth watching too closely. Alistair noticed nothing. He came and went from the city, preoccupied with parliament business, with legislation, with Lyra. Sometimes Serafina caught him smiling at nothing, a soft expression she'd never seen directed at her. It should hurt. Maybe it did, somewhere beneath the cold purpose that had replaced feeling. Mostly, it just made her angry. The morning of the ball, she received a note from Lyra Ashbourne herself, hand-delivered, written in elegant script. Dear Duchess Crowe, I so look forward to seeing you and the Duke at tonight's festivities. Your husband has been such a valuable ally to my family's interests. I do hope we can all become better friends. Warmly, Lyra. The audacity, the sheer nerve of it, reaching out to the wife while sleeping with the husband. Serafina read it twice, then filed it carefully with the other letter, the one Catherine had given her. Evidence, ammunition, the tools of her own destruction. Your Grace. Celeste entered with an armload of fabric. Your gown for tonight. Not the blue silk Alistair had suggested. Serafina had sent for something else. A dress in deep crimson, cut daringly low, beaded with black crystals that caught light like broken glass. A gown for someone who'd stopped caring about being perfect. It's beautiful, Celeste breathed. But the Duke said, The Duke isn't wearing it. Serafina stood, running her fingers over the silk. This will do nicely. Hours later, dressed and ready, she stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized herself. The crimson gown transformed her from invisible duchess to something that demanded attention. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing the column of her throat. Her eyes looked darker, harder. She looked like someone who could start a war. Perfect, she whispered. Alistair was waiting in the entrance hall when she descended, and the look on his face was almost worth 10 years of being ignored. That's not, he started. The blue silk? She smiled. No, I wanted something memorable for such an important evening. Something flickered in his eyes. Confusion, maybe concern, but he was too well-bred to argue in front of the servants. You look striking, he said carefully. Good. She took his offered arm, feeling the stiffness in his posture. Shall we? The carriage ride to the Ashbourne estate was silent, except for rain against windows. Alistair kept glancing at her like he was seeing someone new and wasn't sure how to categorize her. Let him wonder, let him worry. They weren't the first to arrive, but they were important enough that heads turned when they entered. Serafina felt the weight of attention, heard the whispers that followed them through the ballroom. Is that Duchess Crowe? When did she start dressing like that? She looks different, harder, almost dangerous. Good. Let them see. Let them remember she existed. Lyra Ashbourne materialized from the crowd like she'd been waiting, which she probably had. She wore pale gold, all innocence and light, a perfect contrast to Serafina's crimson. Duchess Crowe. Lyra's smile was warm, genuine seeming. How wonderful you could come. And Duke, always a pleasure. Her eyes lingered on Alistair just a moment too long, a connection Serafina was probably meant to miss. She didn't miss it. She catalogued it, added it to her mental list of evidence. Lady Ashbourne. Serafina's smile matched Lyra's for warmth and beat it for danger. What a lovely party. You've outdone yourself. You're too kind. Lyra touched Alistair's arm, brief, casual, intimate. Duke, I was hoping we might discuss the Havishire amendments later. I have some thoughts. Of course. Alistair's voice went softer when he spoke to her, gentler. Things Serafina had once hoped to hear directed at herself. She felt Catherine appear at her elbow, a silent show of support. If you'll excuse me, Serafina said, I should greet the other guests. She walked away with her head high, feeling Alistair's confused gaze follow her. Let him be confused. Let him wonder what changed in his perfectly managed wife. The next 2 hours were a performance worthy of her years of training. Serafina worked the room like she was born to it, which, in a way, she had been. She charmed and laughed and made connections, all while watching Lyra and Alistair from the corner of her eye. They weren't obvious about it. They were too clever for that. But there were looks, small touches, moments of connection that spoke volumes to anyone paying attention, and Serafina was paying very close attention. At 9 o'clock, she signaled Catherine, time to make their move. At 9:15, the Duchess of Havishire would call for attention, suggesting a toast. At 9:20, Serafina would take the floor, and by 9:30 everything would change. She stood near the ballroom's center, crimson gown catching candlelight, and waited for the world to fracture. The Duchess of Havishire raised her glass exactly on schedule, her voice cutting through the ambient chatter like a knife through silk. Ladies and gentlemen, if I might have your attention for a moment. The ballroom quieted in ripples, conversation dying from the center outward. Serafina watched faces turn toward the Duchess, watched Lyra's expression shift from hostess charm to mild confusion. Alistair stood near the windows, brandy in hand, already looking bored by what he assumed would be another tedious toast. I propose we honor our gracious hosts, the Duchess of Havishire continued, and perhaps hear from some of our distinguished guests. Duchess Crowe, would you say a few words? You've been so quiet this evening. Every eye in the room turned to Serafina. She felt the weight of their attention, the curiosity, the mild surprise that anyone would ask the Duke's invisible wife to speak. Lyra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Alistair straightened, a warning in his eyes that said, "Don't embarrass me." Serafina smiled back at him. Then she stepped forward into the center of the ballroom, into the light of 100 candles, and felt the last piece of her old self fall away. "Thank you, Duchess Havishire, how kind." Her voice carried clear and strong, no tremor, no hesitation. 10 years of training made her project confidence even when her heart hammered against her ribs. "I'm honored to be here tonight, among such esteemed company. The Ashbourne family has always understood the value of strategic relationships." A few polite chuckles. Lyra's smile stayed frozen in place. "In fact," Serafina continued, pulling the folded letter from where she'd hidden it in her dress, "I've been learning quite a bit about strategic relationships lately, how they're built, how they're maintained, how some people use them to gain influence they haven't earned through merit alone." The room's energy shifted. People sensed blood in the water, but didn't know whose yet. Alistair moved toward her. "Serafina, perhaps, I found something interesting recently," she said, louder now, cutting him off. The shock on his face was almost worth everything. "A letter. Private correspondence that reveals quite a lot about the nature of certain alliances." She unfolded the paper, held it up where everyone could see Alistair's distinctive handwriting. "Shall I read it? Or would someone like to confess first?" "What are you doing?" Alistair's voice came out low, dangerous, but she heard the panic underneath. "What I should have done years ago." She turned to face him fully, aware of every eye in the room locked on them. "Standing up for myself." "Duchess Crowe." Lyra stepped forward, her composure cracking just enough to show steel beneath. "I don't know what you think you've discovered, but making wild accusations at a public gathering is hardly—" "Wild?" Serafina laughed, sharp and bright. "Let me read just one line then. See if it sounds wild or merely true." She found the passage, felt her voice steady even as she shattered her own life. "When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to want something beyond power." Does that sound familiar, Lady Ashbourne? Or should I read the part about Tuesday night? The ballroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Lyra went pale. Alistair looked like he'd been struck. Catherine appeared at Serafina's shoulder, a show of solidarity that other women noticed. The Duchess of Havishire positioned herself on the other side. A statement, an alliance made visible. "You have no right," Alistair started. "No right?" Serafina's control slipped, let real fury through. "I've been your wife for 10 years. I've run your household, managed your reputation, smiled through every slight and dismissal. And you don't think I have the right to defend myself when you make a mockery of our marriage? This is hardly the place. No, you're right. The proper place would have been in private, where you could deny it, where you could make me doubt what I know to be true, where I could stay invisible and convenient." She turned to address the room, raising her voice over the growing chaos. "But I'm done being convenient, done pretending not to see what everyone else apparently already knows." "How dare you?" Lyra found her voice, though it shook with rage or fear or both. "You come into my home and spread lies." "Are they lies?" Serafina spun to face her. "Look me in the eye and tell me you haven't been sleeping with my husband. Tell me this affair isn't real, that you haven't been using him to push legislation that benefits your family. Tell me, and I'll apologize for everything." The silence stretched like broken glass. Lyra's mouth opened, closed. She glanced at Alistair, a fatal mistake that confirmed everything. "I thought so." Serafina folded the letter with shaking hands. "You're clever, I'll give you that. Using seduction to gain political influence. It's almost elegant. But you made one mistake. You assumed I was too weak to fight back." "Enough." Alistair grabbed her arm, hard enough to hurt. "We're leaving, now." Serafina jerked free with a violence that surprised them both. Don't touch me. Don't ever touch me again. Around them, the ballroom had descended into chaos. Guests whispering, arguing, some already heading for exits to spread the scandal. Lord Ashbourne pushed through the crowd, his face thunderous. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, looking between Seraphina and his daughter. "Lyra?" "It's all lies, father." Lyra rallied, though her voice wavered. "The Duchess is clearly unwell, making wild accusations." "I have proof." Seraphina held up the letter. "Your daughter has been having an affair with Duke Crow for at least 3 months, using it to manipulate Parliament votes. The Havishire Amendments, the Commercial Reform Bill, all influenced by their relationship. This is insane." Alistair's composure was fracturing, pieces of his carefully controlled facade falling away. "You're hysterical." "Don't." The word came out cold as winter. "Don't you dare call me hysterical for refusing to accept betrayal quietly. I've been nothing but loyal, nothing but dutiful. And this," she gestured between him and Lyra, "is how you repay me? Your loyalty?" He laughed bitterly. "You've been a ghost in my house for years, cold, distant. What did you expect?" The words hit like a slap. Around them, the crowd drew breath collectively. "I expected honesty." Seraphina's voice broke, but she pushed through. "I expected the respect you'd give any business partner. I expected you to at least pretend to care whether I existed." She turned to the watching crowd, no longer caring how she looked, what they thought. "You want to know why the perfect Duchess is making a scene? Because perfect got me nothing. Perfect got me a husband who couldn't even be bothered to hide his affair properly. Perfect made me invisible." Catherine touched her elbow gently. "Sarah, we should go." But Seraphina wasn't done. 10 years of silence demanded a voice. "Lady Ashbourne," she faced Lyra directly, "you think you've won something here? You think manipulating a man for political gain makes you powerful?" She stepped closer, aware of how the crimson dress suddenly seemed less like armor and more like war paint. "Let me tell you what power actually is. Power is being underestimated and using it. Power is building alliances while everyone watches your husband instead of you. Power is knowing that when this scandal breaks, and it will break, thoroughly and publicly, you'll be the one destroyed by it. You're threatening me?" Lyra's laugh came out wrong, scared. "You have no influence, no money, no—" "Wrong." The Duchess of Havishire stepped forward. "She has us." Other women moved through the crowd. Ladies Seraphina had cultivated carefully, whose support she'd earned through years of genuine connection. Not many, 5, 6, 7, but enough. Enough to show Lyra she'd miscalculated badly. "What is this?" Lord Ashbourne demanded. "This is what happens," Seraphina said quietly, "when you forget that duchesses talk to each other, that we have our own networks, our own power. You wanted to play politics through seduction? Fine. But you played in our arena and you're not as clever as you thought." Alistair grabbed her arm again, harder. "We're leaving. You've humiliated yourself enough." "No." She wrenched free, stumbled, felt Catherine steady her. "I've humiliated you. Finally. After 10 years of being your perfectly managed wife, I've finally done something you can't control." His hand rose. Not to strike, maybe, but the movement was there. The threat of it. And something in Seraphina snapped completely. "Do it." She lifted her chin, aware of every eye on them. "Hit me, in front of all these witnesses. Give me one more piece of evidence for when I leave you." "You can't leave me." But his hand dropped, uncertainty flickering across his face. "You have nothing. No money, no property." "I have myself." The words came out stronger than she felt. "And I have the truth. And I have witnesses who saw you confirm everything tonight. So yes, Alistair, I can leave. And you can't stop me without making this scandal even worse." The crowd was dead silent now, watching the perfect marriage decompose in real time. Lord Ashbourne found his voice. "Lyra, is any of this true?" "Father," Lyra looked trapped, cornered. "It's complicated." "It's very simple." Seraphina pulled out a second paper, one she'd prepared this afternoon. "I've documented everything. Dates, times, witnesses who've seen them together, political decisions that align suspiciously with Ashbourne interests. All of it." She looked at Alistair. "All of it ready to be sent to every major household in the country. Unless what?" Alistair's voice was dead. Unless we come to an arrangement. She made herself sound calm, businesslike, even as her hands shook. I want an annulment. On grounds of adultery, which you've essentially confirmed tonight. I want my father's estate returned, free and clear. I want a settlement. Not everything. I'm not greedy, but enough to live independently. Absolutely not. Then I'll ruin you. Simple. Final. I'll make sure every person who matters knows exactly what you did. How you compromised yourself for an affair. How Lyra Ashbourne manipulated you into supporting legislation that benefits her family at the expense of traditional landowners. She glanced at the crowd. A lot of powerful people in this room who won't appreciate that. She saw understanding dawn in several faces, saw the shift as people recalculated alliances, considered how this scandal could be used, who it could hurt. You're bluffing, Lyra said, but her voice shook. Am I? Serafina smiled with no warmth at all. Try me. I have nothing left to lose. You, on the other hand, have quite a bit. Your reputation, your father's political capital, your chance at making a good marriage, which will be difficult after everyone knows you seduce other women's husbands. How dare you? How dare I? Serafina's laugh was jagged. You slept with my husband, used him, made me look like a fool, and you want to know how I dare fight back? Lord Ashbourne grabbed his daughter's arm. We're leaving, now, before you make this worse. It can't get worse, Lyra hissed. But she let herself be pulled toward the exit, her gold dress suddenly looking like tarnished metal. Alistair stood frozen, his world collapsing in real time. Serafina, you can't. Watch me. She turned to Catherine. I'd like to leave now. My carriage is outside. They moved through the crowd, which parted like water, everyone staring. Serafina kept her head high, kept walking even though her legs felt like water, even though she could feel her entire life fracturing with each step. Behind them, Alistair called her name. She didn't turn around. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the air was cold, sharp. Serafina climbed into Catherine's carriage, and only then let herself shake, let the reality of what she'd just done crash over her in waves. You were magnificent, Catherine breathed. I was insane. Serafina pressed her hands to her face. I just destroyed my marriage in front of half the court. Your marriage was already destroyed. You just made it public. The carriage pulled away from the Ashbourne estate, leaving the chaos behind. Serafina looked back once, saw Alistair standing in the doorway, watching her leave. Good. Let him watch. Let him understand what it felt like to lose something. What happens now? Catherine asked quietly. Now? Serafina laughed, slightly hysterical. Now I have no idea. I just burned my entire life to the ground. I have no money, no home. The reality hit her hard. Oh God, what have I done? What you had to. Catherine gripped her hand. You can stay with me tonight. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. But tomorrow felt very far away and very terrifying. The carriage rolled through London streets, carrying Serafina away from the wreckage of her old life and toward something unknown. She'd wanted to hurt them, to make them understand what they'd done to her. She'd succeeded, but victory tasted like ashes, and freedom felt dangerously close to falling. The Pemberton townhouse was dark when they arrived. Catherine led her inside through silent halls to a guest room that smelled of lavender and old books. Rest, Catherine urged. Tomorrow everyone will know. Serafina sank onto the bed, still in her crimson dress. Tomorrow, I'll be the Duchess who lost her mind at the Ashbourne ball, the cautionary tale, the woman who couldn't keep her husband. Tomorrow, Catherine said firmly, you'll be the woman who refused to accept betrayal quietly, the one who fought back. That matters, Sarah. After Catherine left, Serafina sat in the darkness, replaying the evening in her head, Alistair's face when she'd held up the letter. Lyra's panic, the gasps and whispers, the moment she'd chosen destruction over silence. She should feel triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. Somewhere in the city, Alistair was probably planning his counterattack, consulting lawyers, calling in favors. Men like him didn't lose gracefully. And Lyra, clever, ambitious Lyra, would be doing damage control, spreading her own version of events, painting Serafina as unstable, jealous, vindictive. Maybe she was all those things now. Maybe that's what betrayal did, turned perfect duchesses into something raw and uncontrolled. Sleep didn't come. Serafina lay awake, watching dawn creep across the ceiling, wondering if she'd won or just traded one cage for another. By morning, news would spread. By noon, everyone who mattered would have an opinion. By evening, her entire world would be different. She'd wanted change, wanted to stop being invisible. Careful what you wish for. The knock came at 7, sharp and urgent. Catherine burst in without waiting, holding a newspaper. "You need to see this." Serafina sat up, took the paper with numb fingers. The society section headline screamed across the page. Scandal at Ashbourne Ball. Duchess Crowe accuses husband of affair. Below it, a detailed account of last night's confrontation. Every word she'd said, every accusation laid out for public consumption. And below that, editorial commentary that made her stomach turn. The Duchess's unseemly display raises questions about her stability and judgment. To accuse one's husband publicly, without proper discretion, suggests a woman unfit for the responsibilities of her station. "They're making me the villain," she whispered. "Some are." Catherine pointed to another article, smaller but present. "But not everyone. Look." A counterpiece, written by a woman Serafina recognized, Lady Morrison, a widow with her own influence. If the accusations are true, we must ask why Duchess Crowe felt public exposure was her only option. What does it say about our society that a woman must create scandal to be heard? Small comfort, but something. "Alistair's people are working fast," Catherine said, "already controlling the narrative, but so are ours. The women who stood with you last night? They're talking, supporting your version of events. It won't be enough." Serafina stood, her dress wrinkled, her hair a mess. "He has money, power, connections. What do I have?" "The truth, and anger, and a growing number of women who are tired of watching men do whatever they want without consequences." A different knock, harder. Catherine's butler appeared, looking nervous. "Your Grace, there's a situation. Duke Crowe is here, demanding to see his wife." Serafina's heart stopped. "Tell him, I'll tell him nothing." Catherine moved to the door. "This is my house. He has no authority here." "Catherine, he could—" "What? Make a scene? Create more scandal?" Catherine's smile was sharp. "Let him try." They went downstairs together, Serafina still in her crimson dress from last night, wrinkled and stained. Armor that had lost its shine. Alistair stood in the entrance hall, looking like he hadn't slept. His clothes were rumpled, shocking for a man who prided himself on appearance. His face was haggard, furious. "Serafina." Her name came out like an accusation. "We need to talk. Now." "We have nothing to discuss." "The hell we don't." He moved toward her, stopped when Catherine stepped between them. "You destroyed everything last night. Our reputation, our standing." "Your reputation," Serafina corrected. "I merely told the truth. You humiliated me in front of everyone who matters, made wild accusations." "Were they wild?" She found her voice, found anger underneath the fear. "Or were they accurate? Because you never actually denied the affair, Alistair. You just got angry that I exposed it." His jaw clenched. "You had no right." "I had every right. I was your wife. I am still your wife, unfortunately. And I deserve better than lies and dismissal and being made to look like a fool." "You made yourself look like a fool." He spat the words. "A hysterical woman who couldn't handle—" "Betrayal," Serafina laughed. "Yes, how unreasonable of me. I should have just accepted it quietly, is that it? Smiled and pretended not to notice while you and Lyra Ashbourne made a mockery of our marriage? It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like? Explain it to me, Alistair. Make me understand how sleeping with another woman was somehow acceptable." Silence. He had no answer that wouldn't condemn him. "I want an annulment," Serafina said, keeping her voice steady through sheer will. "On grounds of adultery. And I want the terms I outlined last night, my father's estate returned, and a settlement." "You'll get nothing." His voice went cold, calculating. "You have no legal standing, no money, no proof beyond a letter that could be fabricated. You think any court will side with you over me? I think enough people witnessed your reaction last night to know the letter was real. I think the political implications of your affair with Lyra Ashbourne will make you enemies among the traditional landowners, and I think you want this scandal contained almost as much as I want my freedom. You're bluffing. Try me. She stepped closer, let him see the truth in her eyes. I have nothing left to lose, Alistair. You made sure of that. So either we end this marriage quietly, with some dignity and tact, or I make the rest of your life a public spectacle. His hand shot out, grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise. You're my wife. You'll do what I say. Let go of her. Catherine's voice cut like ice. Now, or I'll have my staff remove you. This is between me and my wife. This is assault in my home. Catherine moved closer, unafraid. And I have witnesses. So unless you want to add that to your growing list of scandals, I suggest you leave. Alistair looked between them, rage and calculation warring in his expression. Finally, he released Seraphina's wrist, leaving red marks. This isn't over, he said quietly, dangerously. You think you've won something? You've just made yourself an enemy you can't afford. I've made myself free, Seraphina countered. Everything else is negotiable. He turned to leave, stopped at the door. Lyra came to me, confessed everything this morning, cried, apologized, said she'd made a terrible mistake, that I was the one who'd been manipulated. The words were meant to hurt. They did. Of course she did, Seraphina said. Self-preservation is a powerful motivator. Did you believe her? Does it matter? He looked back, and for just a moment she saw something that might have been regret. You've already decided I'm the villain. You decided that yourself. I just made it public. He left. The door closed. Seraphina stood in the sudden silence, shaking so hard her teeth chattered. You were perfect, Catherine said. I was terrified. Even better, you stood up to him anyway. But standing up and winning were different things, and Seraphina knew which one she'd just done. The war was far from over. Alistair would fight back, through lawyers, through social pressure, through every advantage his money and name could buy. And she had what? A borrowed room, a crimson dress, and the support of a handful of women who were just as powerless as she was in any legal sense. What do I do now? She asked Catherine. Now we fight. Catherine gripped her shoulders. We use every connection, every favor, every ounce of influence we've cultivated. We make him understand that ending this marriage quietly is cheaper and easier than the alternative. And if he won't listen, then we make the alternative so terrible he has no choice. Seraphina looked down at her wrist, at the red marks already darkening to bruises. Evidence. Proof of what Alistair became when his control was threatened. Maybe Catherine was right. Maybe they could win this. Or maybe Seraphina had just started a war she couldn't possibly finish. Either way, there was no going back now. The perfect Duchess was dead. What emerged from the wreckage was something else entirely, something angry and determined and possibly doomed. But at least it was real. At least she was finally, terribly, dangerously visible. The bruises on her wrist turned purple by afternoon, visible proof that perfection had its price. Seraphina sat in Catherine's drawing room, a borrowed dress hanging loose on her frame, watching rain streak the windows. 3 days since the ball. 3 days of newspaper headlines that called her everything from courageous to deranged. 3 days of waiting for Alistair's next move. It came in the form of a lawyer. Mr. Edmund Graves arrived at 4 o'clock, precisely on time, carrying a leather case and an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Catherine's butler showed him in with obvious disapproval. Duchess Crowe. Graves nodded stiffly. Thank you for seeing me. Did I have a choice? Seraphina gestured to the chair across from her. Catherine sat beside her, a silent reminder that she wasn't alone. Graves settled himself, opened his case with methodical care. I represent Duke Crowe in matters of delicacy. He's asked me to present you with a proposal. How generous of him. Please. Graves pulled out documents, spread them on the table between them. The Duke is willing to provide you with a monthly allowance, modest, but sufficient for a woman of quiet habits. In exchange, you will retract your accusations, issue a public apology for your behavior at the Ashbourne ball, and accept a legal separation rather than annulment. Seraphina picked up the top document, scanned the numbers. £500 annually? That's what my dignity is worth? It's more than you're entitled to, legally speaking. Graves's tone remained neutral. You have no independent income, no property in your own name. The Duke is being remarkably generous considering the damage you've done to his reputation. The damage I've done? The laugh escaped before she could stop it. He had an affair with a woman half his age, used her to manipulate Parliament, and I'm the one who damaged his reputation. You aired private matters publicly, caused scandal, made accusations that were true, Catherine cut in. The Duke never denied the affair. He just doesn't like being caught. Graves's jaw tightened. Nevertheless, this is his offer. Take it or face the consequences of your actions without his support. Serafina looked at the papers again. £500 a year. Barely enough to maintain a small household, let alone live independently. And in exchange, she'd have to admit she was wrong, had to publicly humiliate herself while Alistair walked away clean. No. Duchess Crowe, I urge you to reconsider. I said no. She pushed the documents back across the table. Tell my husband that I want what I asked for. An annulment on grounds of adultery. My father's estate returned, free and clear, and a settlement of £10,000. Graves's expression didn't change, but she saw the flicker of surprise in his eyes. That's impossible. The Duke will never agree to such terms. Then we go to court. Let a judge decide. Serafina stood, forcing Graves to scramble to his feet. I have evidence, witnesses, and I have public opinion, which is currently very interested in whether powerful men should face consequences for their actions. You have bruises. Graves's voice dropped lower. The Duke mentioned you might attempt to use them as evidence of violence. He wants me to assure you that any claims of assault will be vigorously contested. You fell, according to witnesses. A tragic accident during a moment of emotional instability. The threat was clear. If she pushed, Alistair would paint her as unstable, prone to injury and false accusations. He'd use her public outburst as proof of mental deficiency. Get out! Catherine's voice was ice. Tell Duke Crowe that if he wants a war, we'll give him one. And tell him that my husband sits on the Judiciary Committee that reviews appointments to the Court of Chancery. Might be worth remembering when he's choosing which judges to bribe. Graves gathered his papers, his composure finally cracking. You're making a mistake, both of you. The Duke has resources you can't imagine. Fighting him will destroy you. He already destroyed me. Serafina walked to the door, held it open. I'm just making sure he pays for it. After Graves left, she sank back into her chair, adrenaline draining away and leaving her shaking. That was risky, Catherine said quietly, threatening his legal connections. Was it true? About your husband and the Judiciary Committee? Absolutely not. But Graves doesn't know that. Catherine poured them both tea with steady hands. Alistair's testing you, seeing if you'll cave under pressure. You held firm. That's good. It doesn't feel good. It feels terrifying. Serafina wrapped her hands around the cup, seeking warmth. £500. That's what he thinks I'm worth. What 10 years of marriage earned me. He's trying to make you desperate. Make you accept whatever scraps he offers. Catherine leaned forward. We need to move faster. Build your support before he can isolate you completely. How? I have no money for lawyers, no influence beyond what I've borrowed from you and the others. Alistair controls everything. Not everything. Catherine pulled out a letter, slid it across. This came this morning, from the Duchess of Havershire. She wants to help. Serafina opened it, read the careful script. An invitation to tea, a promise of support, and underneath the polite language, something more. An offer to connect her with a lawyer who specialized in difficult divorces. Why would she help me? We're friendly, but not close. Because she's been where you are. Catherine's voice gentled. 30 years ago, when her first husband, before she was the Duchess, when he beat her badly enough that she couldn't hide it anymore, no one helped. No one wanted the scandal. She had to stay, had to endure it for another decade before he died and freed her. Serafina looked up, shocked. The Duchess of Havershire was an institution, unshakable and powerful. The idea of her trapped, suffering. She doesn't want that for you, Catherine continued. None of us do. We've all swallowed indignities, accepted less than we deserved. But watching you fight back, Sarah, it matters. It gives the rest of us hope that things might actually change. Or it makes me a cautionary tale. The Duchess who tried to leave and lost everything. Maybe, but you're trying. That's more than most of us have ever done. The words settled between them, heavy with truth. Outside, the rain intensified, drumming against windows like accusations. A knock interrupted them. Catherine's butler again, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "Another visitor, my lady, Lord Ashbourne." Seraphina's stomach dropped. "Lyra's father?" "He says it's urgent, regarding matters of mutual concern." Catherine and Seraphina exchanged glances. This couldn't be good. "Show him in," Seraphina said. "Let's hear what he wants." Lord Ashbourne entered like a man walking into battle, shoulders back, expression grim. He was older than Seraphina expected, mid-50s perhaps, with the kind of face that suggested he smiled rarely and meant it even less. "Duchess Crowe," he nodded curtly. "Lady Pemberton, thank you for seeing me without notice. You said it was urgent." Seraphina kept her voice neutral, giving nothing away. "It is." Ashbourne remained standing, hands clasped behind his back. "I'll be direct. You've placed my daughter in an impossible position." "I've done nothing to your daughter. I exposed my husband's infidelity. If that creates problems for Lyra, perhaps she shouldn't have been sleeping with married men." "She's 26 years old." Ashbourne's voice hardened. "Ambitious, yes. Foolish, certainly. But she's my daughter, and you've destroyed her reputation." "She destroyed it herself." "No." Ashbourne stepped closer. "You destroyed it, publicly, deliberately. And now I'm here to clean up the mess." "How noble." "Don't be glib." He pulled a chair forward, sat without invitation. "Here's the situation. Your husband came to me yesterday, proposed an arrangement. He stopped seeing my daughter, issues a statement saying the affair was a momentary lapse of judgment, and I used my influence to quiet the scandal. In exchange for his continued support for commercial reform legislation, and my silence about certain financial irregularities in the Crowe estate accounts." Seraphina felt the room tilt. "What financial irregularities?" Ashbourne smiled, thin and cold. "Your husband has been moving money, large amounts, into accounts that don't appear in any official records. My people found evidence of it while investigating his affairs with Lyra. Embezzlement, possibly, or fraud. Hard to say without a full audit." "You're lying." "Am I?" He pulled out papers, bank statements, transaction records, dates and numbers that Seraphina didn't recognize. "I've been in politics long enough to know where bodies are buried, and your husband has quite a few skeletons." Catherine leaned forward, examining the documents. "This could destroy him. If this got out, it won't get out." Ashbourne gathered the papers. "Because I'm offering you a deal, Duchess Crowe. Drop your demands for annulment. Accept your husband's separation terms. Stop making noise about Lyra, and I'll make sure these financial records disappear." "Why would I do that?" "This is leverage. Proof that Alistair's not the untouchable power he pretends to be. Because if you use it, you destroy yourself too." Ashbourne's voice went soft, dangerous. "The Crowe fortune is your father's lifeline. The estate you want returned? Mortgaged against accounts that are apparently fraudulent. If those accounts collapse, your father loses everything. His land, his home, his legacy. Is your pride worth that?" The air left Seraphina's lungs. She'd known her father's estate was tied to Alistair's money, but she'd assumed it was legitimate. The thought that it might all be built on illegal dealings. "You're bluffing," Catherine said, trying to scare her into backing down. "Perhaps." Ashbourne stood. "Or perhaps I'm offering her a way out of a war she can't win. Your choice, Duchess. But decide quickly, my patience has limits." He left as abruptly as he'd arrived, taking his evidence with him. Seraphina sat frozen, mind racing. If Ashbourne was telling the truth, if Alistair's fortune was built on fraud, then everything she'd been fighting for was tainted. Demanding her father's estate returned meant demanding property purchased with stolen money. Wanting a settlement meant taking a share of illegal gains. "This could be a trick," Catherine said. "A way to make you doubt yourself, give up the fight. Or it could be true." Seraphina pressed her hands to her face. "Either way, it's leverage I can't use without destroying my father. Ashbourne knows that. He's checkmated me." "Not necessarily." Catherine's voice took on a thoughtful tone. "If Alistair's finances are questionable, that makes him vulnerable. Not just to you, but to investigation, legal scrutiny, the kind of attention that powerful men usually avoid. You want me to threaten him with exposure? That hurts my father too. Does it? Or does it give you negotiating power? Catherine moved to Seraphina's side. Think about it. Alistair can't afford a full financial audit. Neither can Ashbourne if he's been covering for this fraud. So they both need you quiet. That's leverage. Leverage that could destroy everyone, including me. Welcome to politics among the powerful. Catherine's smile was grim. Nobody's hands are clean. The trick is figuring out whose are dirtiest. Seraphina wanted to scream. She'd thought this would be simple. Expose the affair, demand justice, rebuild her life. Instead, she was drowning in layers of corruption and threat, everyone playing games where the rules kept changing. I need air. She stood abruptly. I need to think. Sarah, you shouldn't go out alone. Alistair might what? He's already destroyed my marriage, my reputation, my sense of safety. What else can he take? She grabbed a cloak, ignored Catherine's protests, and slipped out into the rain. The streets were mostly empty, sensible people staying dry indoors. Seraphina walked without direction, letting cold water soak through her borrowed dress, mixing with tears she hadn't known she was crying. 10 years. 10 years of trying to be perfect, trying to earn love through duty and competence. And for what? A husband who embezzled money. A father whose estate was built on fraud, a scandal that was swallowing her whole. She found herself near the river, watching dark water flow past, relentless and uncaring. It would be easy to just stop, to give up the fight, accept whatever terms Alistair offered, fade into obscurity as the Duchess who'd lost her mind. Easy, tempting, wrong. I thought I might find you here. Seraphina spun around. A woman stood behind her, hood drawn against the rain, face shadowed. Who? The woman lowered her hood. Lyra Ashbourne. Don't run. Lyra held up her hands, showing she was unarmed. Please, I just want to talk. We have nothing to discuss. We have everything to discuss. Lyra stepped closer, and in the gray light, she looked younger than Seraphina remembered. Scared. You think I wanted this? Any of this? You slept with my husband. Seems like a choice. It was survival. Lyra's voice cracked. My father has debts. Gambling, bad investments, things he can't admit to publicly. He needed political influence to protect his interests, and I was the currency he used. Seraphina stared at her. You're saying you were forced? I'm saying I did what I had to do to protect my family, just like you're doing now. Lyra wrapped her arms around herself. Alistair wasn't supposed to matter. It was supposed to be simple. Seduce him, get his support for our legislation, move on. But what? He fell for me. Or thought he did. Started talking about leaving you, about us building a life together. And I panicked because that wasn't the plan. My father just wanted his vote, not a scandal. So you used him. Seraphina felt something shift, understanding clicking into place. You manipulated a man who was already unhappy in his marriage, made him think he loved you, then discarded him when it got complicated. Yes, Lyra met her eyes. I'm not proud of it, but I'm also not sorry. Your husband is not a good man, Duchess. You think this affair is his first? You think you're the first wife he's hurt? The words hit like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Before you, there was another woman. Someone he promised to marry, then abandoned when a better match came along. She killed herself. Lyra's voice went flat. Threw herself into the Thames. Alistair paid off her family, buried the scandal, moved on like she'd never existed. Seraphina felt the ground shift beneath her feet. You're lying. Am I? Ask him. Ask him about Margaret Winters. See what he says. Lyra pulled her hood back up. I came here to warn you. My father wants me to disappear, to take the blame for everything and vanish quietly. But I won't go without making sure you know who you're really fighting. Why tell me this? Because you exposed me publicly, destroyed my reputation, and I could hate you for it, probably should hate you for it. Lyra's smile was bitter. But watching you stand there at that ball, calling out every lie, every manipulation, I envied you. I've never had the courage to fight back like that. Courage or stupidity, I'm still not sure which. Does it matter? You did it. And now everyone's scrambling because you broke the script. You reminded them that women don't have to accept what we're given. Lyra started to walk away, paused. Whatever you decide to do next, do it fast. My father's planning something. I don't know what, but he's not the type to let threats stand. She disappeared into the rain, leaving Serafina alone with new questions and old doubts. Margaret Winters, another woman Alistair had destroyed. Serafina walked back to Catherine's townhouse slowly, her mind working through possibilities and consequences. If Lyra was telling the truth, and the raw pain in her voice suggested she was, then this wasn't about one affair. It was about a pattern. A man who used women and discarded them, who hid behind wealth and power while destroying anyone who got in his way. The house was ablaze with light when she returned. Too much light. Something was wrong. She burst through this door to find chaos. Catherine arguing with two men in official-looking coats, papers scattered across the floor. The butler trying to maintain order and failing. "What's happening?" Catherine turned, her face pale. "Magistrates. They have a warrant." "A warrant for what?" One of the men stepped forward, pulled out a document. "Duchess Serafina Crowe, you're under investigation for theft and slander. We have orders to search the premises and escort you to custody for questioning." The room spun. "What? I haven't stolen anything." "Duke Crowe has filed a complaint alleging you removed valuable property from the marital home without permission. Jewelry, documents, personal effects worth several £1,000s. The magistrate's voice was bored, like he did this every day. "He's also filed charges of public slander, claiming your accusations at the Ashbourne Ball were knowingly false and intended to damage his reputation." "This is insane." Catherine moved between Serafina and the magistrates. "The Duchess took nothing that wasn't hers, and the accusations were true. That will be determined by the courts. For now, she needs to come with us." Serafina felt something inside her break, not collapse, but crystallize. Alistair wasn't just fighting back. He was trying to destroy her completely, using the law itself as a weapon. "Fine." She stepped forward, chin high. "I'll come, but I want a lawyer present during questioning, and I want these charges documented publicly, every word." The magistrate's eyes narrowed. "That's your right." They led her out into the rain, into a carriage that smelled of damp leather and old fear. Catherine tried to follow, but was blocked. "Send word to the Duchess of Havershire," Serafina called back. "Tell her what happened. Tell everyone." The carriage pulled away. Through the window, she watched Catherine standing in the doorway, backlit and furious. This was war now. Real war, with legal weapons and powerful enemies. Alistair had made the first move, and it was devastating. But he'd also made a mistake. He'd shown his hand too early, revealed that he was desperate enough to weaponize the courts. Desperate men made errors. Serafina just had to survive long enough to exploit them. The magistrate's office was cold and institutional, all stone walls and hard chairs. They put her in a room alone, left her there for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. When the door finally opened, it wasn't a magistrate who entered. It was Alistair. He closed the door behind him, locked it with a key he shouldn't have had. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "Hello, Serafina." She stood, putting the table between them. "You can't be here. This is illegal. I own the magistrate who arrested you. I own half the men in this building." He moved closer, circling the table like a predator. "You really thought you could fight me? You with nothing, against everything I've built? Get out. No." He grabbed her arm, yanked her close. "You're going to listen. You're going to hear what happens to women who forget their place." His grip was iron, his breath hot against her face. Serafina felt real fear for the first time. Not social fear, not reputation fear, but the animal terror of being trapped with someone who wanted to hurt her. "I could make you disappear," he whispered. "An accident, a tragedy, the unstable Duchess who threw herself in the river, just like Margaret Winters did." So it was true. The woman Lyra mentioned. Alistair killed her, or drove her to it. "People know I'm here," Serafina forced out. "Catherine knows. If something happens to me, then you'll be another unfortunate casualty of your own hysteria." He released her abruptly, leaving bruises. "But I'm feeling generous. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to confess that you stole from me. You're going to admit your accusations were false, products of mental instability. You're going to beg for my forgiveness, publicly and completely." "Never." "Yes, you will. Because if you don't, I'll make sure your father is arrested for fraud. The evidence Ashbourne has, I gave it to him. I've been documenting every illegal transaction for years, insurance against exactly this kind of situation, and I'll use it to destroy your father unless you break." The air left her lungs. "You bastard." "I'm a duke. I can be whatever I want." He smiled, and it was the cruelest thing she'd ever seen. "You have until tomorrow morning. Confess, or watch your father hang for my crimes." He left her there, locked in the room, alone with impossible choices. Serafina sank to the floor, back against the wall, and finally let herself break. Not cry, she was past crying. Just break, shatter into pieces that she didn't know how to put back together. Alistair had won. He had found the one thing she couldn't sacrifice, the one person she'd destroy herself to protect. Her father, already fragile, already struggling. He wouldn't survive prison, wouldn't survive the scandal. She could fight Alistair and lose everything, or she could surrender and lose herself. Either way, she lost. Outside, rain battered the windows. Inside, Serafina sat in the dark and tried to figure out if there was any possible way forward that didn't end in complete destruction, and came up empty. The floor was cold. Serafina noticed that first, stone seeping chill through her borrowed dress, into her bones, into the empty space where hope used to live. She sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, Alistair's threat echoing in her skull. Confess or watch your father hang. Simple, okay, brutal, effective. Except something was wrong with the equation. Something didn't fit. Serafina forced herself to think past the panic, past the image of her father in chains. Alistair said he'd given the evidence to Ashbourne, said he'd been documenting fraud for years. But why? Why create evidence of his own crimes? Why hand ammunition to a political rival unless he needed Ashbourne's cooperation more than his silence? Which meant the fraud was real, extensive, and probably involved people beyond just Alistair. People with power. People who couldn't afford exposure any more than he could. The thought crystallized like ice forming on glass. If Alistair had been embezzling or laundering money, he hadn't done it alone. He'd needed bankers, accountants, other nobles willing to look the other way or actively participate. A network of corruption that reached deeper than one duke's greed. And if that network existed, then Alistair wasn't the only one who'd be destroyed by exposure. Everyone involved would fall, which meant they all needed her quiet, which meant she had leverage after all. Serafina stood up slowly, her legs protesting. She walked to the locked door, tested it. Solid, no chance of breaking through. But there was a window, small, barred, but open enough that sound might carry. She took a breath and screamed. Not a scream of fear, a scream of rage, sustained and deliberate, designed to shatter the institutional quiet of a magistrate's office at night. Footsteps pounded in the hallway. The door flew open. A guard stared at her, confused and angry. "What in hell? I want a lawyer." Serafina's voice came out steady despite her hammering heart. "Now, it's my legal right, and if you deny it, I'll make sure everyone knows Duke Crow is using the courts to silence his wife." The Duke said, "I don't care what the Duke said. I'm invoking my right to counsel. Either provide it or explain to your superiors why you violated the law to please a man who's currently under investigation for fraud." The guard's eyes widened. "What fraud?" "Ask Lord Ashbourne. Ask anyone who was at the Ashbourne ball. This isn't just about an affair anymore. This is about embezzlement, illegal financial dealings, and a duke trying to cover his crimes by destroying his wife." She stepped closer to the guard, let him see the bruises on her wrist. "Do you really want to be part of that?" The man hesitated, caught between orders and self-preservation. Finally, "I'll see what I can do." He left, locking the door again. But the lock sounded different now, less certain. Serafina paced the small room, mind racing. She needed a lawyer, yes, but more than that, she needed to get word out. To Catherine, to the Duchess of Havershire, to anyone who could spread the story before Alistair controlled the narrative completely. The door opened again 20 minutes later. Not the guard this time. A woman, middle-aged and sharp-eyed, carrying a worn leather case. "Duchess Crow? I'm Mrs. Eleanor Finch. The Duchess of Havershire sent me." Serafina could have cried with relief. "How did you—" "Your friend Lady Pemberton raised holy hell when they took you, called in every favor she had. The Duchess of Havershire has connections even Duke Crow can't override entirely." Mrs. Finch set down her case, pulled out papers and pen. "We don't have much time. Tell me everything." Serafina talked fast, outlining the charges, Alistair's threat, the evidence of fraud that Ashbourne held. Mrs. Finch listened without interrupting, taking notes in shorthand that looked like code. This is worse than I thought, she said when Serafina finished. But also better. If Crow's threatening you with his own criminal evidence, he's desperate. Desperate enough to make mistakes. He wants me to confess tomorrow morning, publicly recant everything. And if you do, you're finished. No credibility, no standing, nothing. Mrs. Finch tapped her pen against her lips. But if you don't, he destroys your father. Quite the trap. I can't let my father go to prison for Alistair's crimes. No. But you also can't sacrifice yourself. Mrs. Finch leaned forward. What if I told you there's a third option? One that's risky as hell, but might actually work? I'm listening. We go on the offensive. Tomorrow morning, before Crow can force your confession, we file charges against him. Fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, everything we can think of based on what Ashbourne has. We make it public, loud, impossible to ignore. Serafina's stomach dropped. That destroys my father too. The estate is already compromised. Whether you confess or not, whether Crow follows through on his threats or not, your father's estate is built on illegal money. That's not changing. Mrs. Finch's voice gentled slightly. But if we control the narrative, we can position your father as a victim, a man who trusted his son-in-law's financial management, who had no idea the money was dirty. It's not perfect, but it's better than him hanging for Crow's crimes. And if it doesn't work, if they prosecute him anyway, then at least you fought back. At least you didn't let Crow win by default. Mrs. Finch pulled out more papers. I need you to sign these. Authorization for me to act on your behalf, permission to file charges, a sworn statement about everything Crow told you tonight. Serafina stared at the documents. Signing meant burning every bridge, destroying any chance of reconciliation. It meant choosing war over surrender. It also meant choosing herself over fear. She signed. Good. Mrs. Finch gathered everything. Now comes the hard part. We need to get you out of here before Crow realizes what we're doing. And we need to do it legally, which means convincing a judge to release you despite the charges. How? By making enough noise that keeping you locked up becomes more trouble than it's worth. Mrs. Finch smiled grimly. The Duchess of Havishire is very good at making noise. She left, promising to return within hours. Serafina sat alone again, but this time the emptiness felt different. Not defeated. Waiting. The screaming started around midnight. Not her screaming, dozens of voices outside the magistrate's office, shouting, demanding. Serafina pressed her face to the barred window and saw something impossible. Women, at least 50 of them, maybe more, carrying lanterns and signs. She recognized faces, ladies she'd met at parties, wives of minor nobles, women she'd exchanged pleasantries with over the years. And at the front, unmistakable even in the dark, the Duchess of Havishire. Release Duchess Crow! The chant rose and fell like waves. Justice for women. End corruption. The guard burst into her room, panicked. What did you do? Me? Nothing. Serafina couldn't stop the smile spreading across her face. They did this themselves. They're blocking the entrance, demanding to see you. The magistrate says what? A new voice, cold and authoritative. The Duchess of Havishire swept into the room like she owned it. Behind her, Mrs. Finch and 2 more lawyers. That he's going to keep a duchess imprisoned illegally while 50 witnesses watch? She's charged with theft and slander. Charges filed by her husband, using magistrates he owns, without proper evidence or due process. The Duchess turned to Serafina. Are you well, my dear? I've been better. I imagine so. Gentlemen? She addressed the lawyers. Please explain to this young man why holding Duchess Crow constitutes illegal detention. The next 30 minutes were a blur of legal jargon and barely contained threats. The magistrate was summoned from his home, arriving furious and frightened. Mrs. Finch presented paperwork, citations, precedents. The Duchess of Havishire simply stood there, her presence a reminder that some people couldn't be bullied. Finally, grudgingly, the magistrate relented. Fine. Duchess Crow is released on her own recognizance pending investigation, but she's not to leave the city, and she must appear for questioning when summoned. Agreed. Mrs. Finch gathered her papers. And Duke Crow will be receiving his own summons for fraud, embezzlement, and witness intimidation. The magistrate's face went white. You can't watch us. They walked out together, Serafina flanked by lawyers and supported by the Duchess. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers. Women pressed forward, touching her hands, her dress, offering words of encouragement and solidarity. "We're with you. Don't let him win. Thank you for fighting back." Serafina felt tears threatening and blinked them away. These women, most of them strangers really, had shown up in the middle of the night to demand her release, had risked their reputations, their husband's anger, to stand with her. "Why?" she whispered to the Duchess of Havershire as they climbed into a carriage. "Why would they do this?" "Because you reminded them that silence isn't the only option." The Duchess settled into her seat, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. "We've all swallowed indignities, Serafina, all played the game, stayed quiet, accepted less than we deserved. But watching you refuse to accept it, that changed something, made us remember we used to be brave too." The carriage pulled away from the magistrate's office, leaving the crowd dispersing into the night. Catherine was waiting at Pemberton House, pacing frantically. Thank heaven. She pulled Serafina into a fierce hug. "When they took you, I thought—" "I know." Serafina held on tight, letting herself take comfort for just a moment. "But I'm here, and we're fighting back." They gathered in Catherine's drawing room, Serafina, Catherine, Mrs. Finch, the Duchess of Havershire, and 3 other lawyers who'd been roused from their beds. Papers covered every surface. Someone had sent for coffee and sandwiches, though no one seemed interested in eating. "Here's where we stand," Mrs. Finch said, spreading documents across the table. "We're filing charges against Duke Crow first thing in the morning. Fraud, embezzlement, witness intimidation, and assault based on those bruises on your wrist. It's aggressive, but it puts him on defense." "He'll retaliate," Serafina said. "Let him. Every move he makes now happens under scrutiny. The magistrate's office is already compromised by tonight's spectacle. They can't be seen as his puppets anymore." One of the other lawyers, a thin man with ink-stained fingers, cleared his throat. "There's another angle we should consider. Lord Ashbourne's involvement. If Crow gave him the fraud evidence, that makes Ashbourne complicit in concealing crimes. We could threaten to expose him too." "Risky," the Duchess of Havershire said. "Ashbourne has his own power base. Making an enemy of him—" "We've already made an enemy of him," Serafina interrupted. "His daughter's reputation is destroyed. He's protecting Alistair to protect himself. If we offer him a way out, immunity in exchange for testimony, he might take it." The lawyers exchanged glances. Mrs. Finch nodded slowly. "It could work. Ashbourne's pragmatic. If he sees the ship sinking, he'll save himself." "So we approach him?" Catherine asked. "Not yet. First we file charges, make the threat real, then we see how Ashbourne reacts." Mrs. Finch looked at Serafina. "Are you prepared for what comes next? Once we file, there's no going back. Crow will use every weapon he has. He already tried to destroy me. At least now I'm fighting back." They worked through the night, drafting charges, preparing statements, building a case from fragments of evidence and Alistair's own threats. By dawn, they had something that resembled a legal strategy. The sun was rising when Mrs. Finch finally stood. "I'll file these within the hour. The courts open at 8. By noon, every newspaper in the city will have the story." "And Alistair?" "Will be scrambling to save himself, which is exactly where we want him." Mrs. Finch gathered her papers. "Get some rest, Duchess. The next few days will be brutal." After the lawyers left, Serafina stood at the window, watching dawn paint the city in shades of gold and gray. Somewhere out there, Alistair was probably sleeping peacefully, confident he'd won. By lunch, he'd know different. "You should sleep," Catherine said softly. "Can't. Too much adrenaline." Serafina turned from the window. "Catherine, what if this doesn't work? What if we just made everything worse?" "Then at least we went down fighting." Catherine came to stand beside her. "But I don't think it will fail. You've changed the game, Sarah. Forced everyone to choose sides. Some will choose Alistair, yes. But others will choose you. And that's more than you had yesterday." The morning papers arrived at 7. The scandal from the Ashbourne ball was still front-page news, but now it had company. Stories about the arrest, the protest, the Duchess of Havershire's involvement, opinion pieces debating women's rights, and the abuse of legal power. Serafina read them all, cataloging allies and enemies. The battle lines were forming. At 8:30, a messenger arrived. Not from the courts, from Lord Ashbourne. Catherine opened the letter, scanned it quickly. He wants to meet. Today. Says he has information you'll want to hear. It's a trap. Probably, but what if it's not? What if he's actually willing to deal? Serafina thought about it, weighing risks. Tell him yes. But in a public place, the gardens at Havershire Square, 2 o'clock, and I'm bringing witnesses. The message was sent. Serafina spent the next few hours preparing, rehearsing what to say, what to demand, how to read Ashbourne's intentions. The Duchess of Havershire insisted on attending, along with Catherine and Mrs. Finch. Safety in numbers, the Duchess said. And if Ashbourne tries anything untoward, I'll personally see him ruined. They arrived at Havershire Square 15 minutes early, claiming a bench near the fountain where they'd be visible from all angles. Lord Ashbourne appeared precisely at 2, alone except for a single footman who stayed by the gate. Duchess Crowe. He nodded to the group. Ladies, thank you for agreeing to meet. You said you had information, Serafina said, keeping her voice neutral. I do. But first I need to know something. The charges you filed this morning, are they negotiable? That depends on what you're offering. Ashbourne sat down across from them, suddenly looking older than his years. I'm offering to testify against Crowe. Everything I know about his financial dealings, the fraud, the embezzlement, all of it. Serafina's heart jumped. In exchange for immunity for myself and my daughter. Lyra made mistakes, yes, but she's not a criminal. And I got caught up in Crowe's schemes without fully understanding the consequences. Mrs. Finch leaned forward. That's a convenient story, Lord Ashbourne. You expect us to believe you had no idea the money was dirty? I suspected, but I didn't know the extent. And now that it's coming to light, I want out. He pulled papers from his coat. Here. Financial records going back 5 years. Account numbers, transaction dates, names of everyone involved, proof that Crowe has been siphoning money from estate accounts and laundering it through shell companies. The Duchess of Havershire took the papers, examined them with a practiced eye. This is extensive. If it's genuine, it implicates at least a dozen other nobles. It's genuine, and yes, it will cause chaos. But keeping it hidden only protects Crowe. Ashbourne looked at Serafina. He threatened your father, didn't he? Said he'd have him arrested for fraud? How did you know? Because it's his standard play. Threaten someone you love, force compliance. He did it to me with Lyra. Said if I didn't cooperate, he'd ruin her reputation beyond repair. Ashbourne's voice hardened. I thought I could manage him, keep him controlled while using his influence. I was wrong. Why turn on him now? Because you did. Because your refusal to stay silent made me realize that maybe there's another way. He stood, preparing to leave. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Duchess. I'm asking for a chance to do the right thing, even if it's too late. And Lyra? Serafina asked. What happens to her? She leaves the country. France, probably. Somewhere she can start fresh without the weight of this scandal. Ashbourne's expression softened slightly. She asked me to give you something. He handed Serafina a sealed letter. She opened it, read the neat script. I'm sorry. Not for what I did. I'd make the same choices again to protect my family. But for the pain it caused you, you deserved better. We all did. Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. L. Serafina folded the letter carefully. Tell her I understand. After Ashbourne left, the 4 women sat in stunned silence. This changes everything, Mrs. Finch said finally. With Ashbourne's testimony and these records, we have enough to prosecute Crowe and potentially a dozen others. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is a corruption scandal that reaches into Parliament itself. Which means more enemies, Serafina said. Everyone implicated in those records will want me silenced, or they'll turn on Crowe to save themselves. The Duchess of Havershire smiled. Either way, you're no longer isolated. You've exposed a network that's been operating in shadow for years. That has consequences. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through Ashbourne's evidence, cross-referencing names and dates, building a timeline of fraud that stretched back nearly a decade. By evening, they had enough to bring charges against Alistair and 3 other nobles who'd been helping him move money. We file tomorrow, Mrs. Finch decided. Give it to every major newspaper simultaneously. Make it impossible to suppress. Serafina nodded, though exhaustion was setting in. And Alistair? What will he do when this breaks? Probably try to run or buy his way out, or Mrs. Finch paused. Or he'll come after you directly. You're the source of all his problems now. Eliminating you eliminates the witness. The words hung in the air, a reminder that this wasn't just legal warfare. It was personal and dangerous. I'll assign protection, the Duchess said. Men I trust. They'll watch the house, make sure no one gets close. Thank you. That night, Serafina lay awake in Catherine's guest room, listening to footsteps outside. The guards the Duchess had sent, pacing their rounds. She thought about Margaret Winters, the woman who'd thrown herself in the Thames rather than face Alistair's wrath. Wondered if Margaret had felt this same combination of terror and determination in her final days. But Serafina wasn't Margaret. She had allies now, witnesses, evidence. She had the Duchess of Havershire's influence and Catherine's loyalty and Mrs. Finch's legal expertise. She wasn't alone. The thought sustained her as she finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Morning came with shocking news. The newspapers that should have been printing stories about Ashbourne's evidence instead carried a different headline. Duke Crowe announces medical leave, cites wife's mental instability. Serafina read the article with growing horror. Alistair had given an interview claiming she'd been suffering from delusions and paranoia for months, that he'd been seeking medical treatment for her in private, trying to protect her dignity, that her accusations were the product of a diseased mind, not reality. He's trying to have you declared insane, Mrs. Finch said, arriving early with more newspapers. It's a legal strategy. If he can prove mental incompetence, your testimony becomes worthless. The charges get dismissed. Everything falls apart. Can he do that? With the right doctors and enough money? Yes. Mrs. Finch's expression was grim. We need to move faster than I thought. The Duchess of Havershire arrived within the hour, bringing her own team of physicians. We'll get you examined by doctors, I trust. Get sworn statements about your mental state. Counter his narrative before it takes hold. The examinations were humiliating. Questions about her moods, her sleep, her emotional stability. But Serafina answered honestly. Let them poke and prod and assess, because the alternative was worse. By afternoon, they had 3 independent medical opinions declaring her of sound mind and body. Mrs. Finch filed them immediately, along with countercharges accusing Alistair of attempting to abuse the mental health system to silence his wife. The newspapers ate it up. Competing stories, dueling doctors, a scandal that got messier by the hour. And through it all, Serafina felt something shifting. The narrative was no longer entirely Alistair's to control. Other voices were entering the conversation. Women's advocates, reform-minded politicians, even some of the men implicated in Ashbourne's evidence who were now scrambling to distance themselves from Alistair. The tide was turning. Slowly, painfully, but turning. 3 days later, the breakthrough came. Serafina was having tea with Catherine when Mrs. Finch burst in, waving a newspaper with almost manic energy. We got him! Finally, we got him! The headline read, Parliament calls for investigation into Duke Crowe's finances. Below it, a detailed article about how Ashbourne's evidence had reached key members of Parliament, about how pressure from women's groups and reformist politicians had forced the issue, about how avoiding investigation would look like protecting corruption. They're forming a committee, Mrs. Finch said, breathless. Official parliamentary inquiry into Crowe's financial dealings. He can't buy his way out of this. It's too public now. Serafina felt something break inside her. Not collapse, but release. Like a weight she'd been carrying for so long that she'd forgotten what lightness felt like. Does this mean? It means you won. Not completely, not yet. But you forced them to look. You made enough noise that they couldn't ignore it anymore. Mrs. Finch sat down heavily. The inquiry will take months, but once it starts, Crowe's finished. And you'll be free. The word felt foreign. Free. From Alistair, from obligation, from the cage of perfection she'd built around herself. That evening, a message arrived. Not threatening this time, requesting. Alistair wanted to meet, to discuss terms. Don't go, Catherine urged. It's dangerous. I'll go, Serafina said, but with witnesses. And in daylight. He wants to negotiate? Fine. Let's negotiate. They met at the Crowe Manor Library. neutral ground, technically, though it felt anything but. Alistair stood by the windows, looking diminished somehow, smaller, older. Mrs. Finch and the Duchess of Havershire flanked Seraphina. Alistair was alone. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice lacking its usual command. "What do you want, Alistair?" "To end this, before it destroys us both." He turned to face her. "The parliamentary inquiry. I can't stop it, but I can minimize the damage. Make sure certain names stay private, including your father's. In exchange for what? Your silence. No more public accusations. No testimony against me. Take a generous settlement and disappear." Seraphina laughed, sharp and bitter. "You threatened to have my father hanged. You tried to have me declared insane. You locked me in a magistrate's office and told me I'd end up like Margaret Winters. And now you want my silence?" Alistair flinched at Margaret's name. I was desperate. I'm sorry." "Sorry." She tasted the word. 10 years of marriage, and that's the first time you've apologized for anything. "Seraphina, please. I'm offering you a way out. Take the money. Start fresh somewhere new. We can both move on." "I don't want to move on. I want justice." She stepped closer. "I want you to face consequences. Real ones. For Margaret, for me, for every woman you've used and discarded. Then you'll destroy yourself too. The scandal will never end. You'll always be the Duchess who fought back," the Duchess of Havershire interrupted. "Who refused to be silenced. That's not the insult you think it is." Alistair's composure cracked. "Fine. You want war. You'll get it. But don't expect mercy when this is over." "I never did," Seraphina said quietly. "You taught me that mercy is for people who deserve it. You don't." She walked out, leaving him standing in the ruins of his power, and it felt like flying. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. Outside Crow Manor, rain had started again, a cold autumn drizzle that matched the gray settling over Seraphina's thoughts. The carriage waited, Catherine and the Duchess of Havershire already inside. But Seraphina paused on the steps, looking back at the house that had been her prison for 10 years. She'd walked out on her husband. Actually walked out, mid-conversation, leaving him standing there with his empty apologies and transparent threats. The old Seraphina, the perfect Duchess, would never have managed it. Good thing she was dead. "Sarah?" Catherine called from the carriage. "We should go." But Seraphina wasn't ready yet. She turned to Mrs. Finch, who'd followed them out. "The parliamentary inquiry. When does it start?" 2 weeks. They're assembling the committee now, interviewing potential witnesses." Mrs. Finch's expression turned calculating. "Why?" "Because I want to testify. Publicly. On record." The Duchess of Havershire leaned out of the carriage. "That's dangerous. Crow's lawyers will tear you apart on cross-examination." "Let them try." Seraphina climbed into the carriage, her decision crystallizing. "I've been quiet for 10 years. If I'm going to be destroyed anyway, I want to go down telling the truth." They rode back to Pemberton House in tense silence. The city passed by the windows, London going about its business, unaware that somewhere in its midst, a duchess was planning revolution. The next 2 weeks were brutal preparation. Mrs. Finch drilled Seraphina on testimony protocol, on how to answer hostile questions, on maintaining composure under attack. The Duchess of Havershire coached her on court politics, on reading the committee members, on knowing which ones could be swayed and which were already bought. Catherine just made sure she ate and slept and didn't collapse under the pressure. "You don't have to do this," she said one night, finding Seraphina awake at 3 a.m, reviewing testimony notes. "The inquiry will happen with or without you. Ashbourne's evidence is damning enough." "It's not about the evidence." Seraphina set down her papers. "It's about being visible, about standing up in that room and saying, 'I'm here, I matter, and you can't silence me anymore.' If I don't do that, then what was it all for? Your freedom, your life back." "I don't want my old life back. I want a new one. And that starts with refusing to hide." The morning of the inquiry, Seraphina dressed carefully. Not in the severe styles she'd favored as the perfect Duchess, but not in crimson war paint either. Something between a deep blue dress that suggested authority without aggression, her hair swept back to show her face clearly. No hiding, no apologizing for taking up space. The parliamentary chamber was already packed when they arrived. Nobles filled the gallery, journalists crowded the press section, and at the front, the inquiry committee sat behind a long table looking appropriately solemn and important. Alistair was there too, flanked by 3 lawyers who probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. He didn't look at her, didn't acknowledge her presence at all, like if he ignored her hard enough, she might disappear. Not this time. The committee chairman, Lord Westbrook, 60 and stern, called the session to order with a gavel that echoed like gunshots. This inquiry has been convened to investigate allegations of financial impropriety involving Duke Alistair Crowe and potentially other members of the peerage. We will hear testimony, review evidence, and make recommendations to Parliament regarding prosecution. The first witnesses were accountants, boring and technical, walking through financial records with the enthusiasm of men discussing paint drying. But necessary, they established the framework, showed how money had moved through accounts, where it had disappeared, how the fraud had been constructed. Then came Lord Ashbourne. He took the stand looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 2 weeks. His testimony was methodical, damning, and completely self-serving. He portrayed himself as a victim of Crowe's manipulation, someone who'd suspected wrongdoing but lacked proof until recently. Serafina watched Alistair's face darken with each revelation, watched him lean toward his lawyers, whispering urgently, watching his carefully constructed empire crumble in real time. Lord Ashbourne, one of the committee members, asked, "You're saying Duke Crowe threatened your daughter to ensure your cooperation?" "Yes. He said if I didn't support certain legislation, he'd ruin her reputation, make sure she never made a good marriage. I believed him. I'd seen what he did to his wife." The chamber erupted in whispers. The chairman banged his gavel. What did he do to his wife? Isolated her, controlled her, made her dependent on his goodwill while he conducted affairs and used her social connections for his benefit. And when she finally fought back, he tried to have her declared insane. Alistair stood abruptly. "This is slander. Ashbourne is lying to save himself. Duke Crowe, you will have your chance to testify. Sit down." Alistair sat, but the damage was done. The committee had seen his lack of control, his desperation. After Ashbourne came more witnesses. Bankers who'd processed questionable transactions, a former clerk who'd been paid to falsify records, even one of the other nobles implicated in the scheme who'd turned evidence in exchange for immunity. Each testimony built the case higher, made Alistair look smaller, more cornered. Then, finally, we called Duchess Serafina Crowe to testify. The walk to the witness stand felt like miles. Every eye in the chamber followed her, judging, assessing, waiting to see if she'd break under pressure. She took her seat, placed her hand on the Bible for the oath, and met the chairman's eyes steadily. "Duchess Crowe, thank you for appearing today. I understand this is difficult." "Thank you, Lord Westbrook, but difficulty is relative." A small smile touched his lips. "Indeed. Please state your relationship to Duke Crowe." "I've been his wife for 10 years. Though I use wife loosely. I was more of an employee who happened to share his name." More whispers. The chairman leaned forward. "Can you elaborate?" "Our marriage was arranged, a financial transaction disguised as romance. My father's estate for the Crowe name and fortune. I was 19 and desperate to save my family. I thought duty might become affection eventually. I was wrong." "And during those 10 years, did you observe any of the financial irregularities we've been discussing?" "No. Duke Crowe excluded me from all business matters. Said women shouldn't trouble themselves with finance." She paused. "But I observed other things, the affairs, the manipulation, the way he used people and discarded them when they were no longer useful." Alistair's lawyer shot to his feet. "Objection. This is character assassination, not relevant testimony." "It's absolutely relevant," Mrs. Finch countered. "It establishes pattern of behavior, deception, manipulation, abuse of power." "I'll allow it," the chairman said. "Continue, Duchess." Serafina took a breath. This was it, the moment she'd been preparing for. "Before me, there was another woman, Margaret Winters. Duke Crowe promised to marry her, then abandoned her when a better match came along, me, with my father's estate. Margaret threw herself in the Thames, drowned rather than face the scandal." The chamber went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. "That's a lie!" Alistair was on his feet again. "Margaret Winters was mentally unstable. Her death had nothing to do with me." Then why did you pay her family £5,000 after she died? Serafina pulled out a document, one of the many Ashbourne had provided. Hush money, to keep them quiet about the circumstances. Alistair's face went white. His lawyer grabbed his arm, forcing him back into his seat. The chairman studied the document. Is this authentic? It is, Ashbourne confirmed from the gallery. I witnessed the transaction myself. Crow bragged about it later, said he'd dodged a bullet by choosing the Veil Girl instead. Serafina felt the words hit. The Veil Girl, as if she'd been interchangeable. Just another transaction. But instead of pain, she felt clarity. This was who Alistair was. Who he'd always been. And she was done pretending otherwise. Duchess Crow, another committee member, asked, When did you first suspect your husband's financial impropriety? When Lord Ashbourne showed me evidence that my father's estate, the one supposedly purchased legitimately with Crow money, was actually bought with embezzled funds. That's when I realized the entire foundation of my marriage was fraudulent. And yet you came forward anyway, knowing it might damage your father's interests? My father would rather lose his estate than benefit from stolen money. We both would. She looked directly at Alistair. Some of us still believe in integrity. The questioning continued for hours. They asked about the Ashbourne ball, about the affair with Lyra, about Alistair's attempt to have her arrested and declared insane. Serafina answered everything honestly, holding nothing back, letting the full ugly truth spill out for everyone to see. Alistair's lawyers tried to discredit her, suggested she was bitter, vindictive, emotionally unstable. But Serafina had 3 independent medical examinations confirming her sanity, had witnesses to Alistair's threats, had the bruises on her wrists that hadn't quite faded. Evidence didn't lie. Finally, exhausted, Serafina was excused. She walked back to her seat on shaking legs, felt Catherine's hand squeeze hers in support. You were magnificent, the Duchess of Havishire whispered. Serafina just felt empty, drained, like she'd poured everything she was onto that witness stand and had nothing left. Then it was Alistair's turn. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd never faced real consequences, who still believed money and power could fix anything. His testimony was smooth, practiced. He denied everything that could be denied, claimed ignorance about everything else, painted himself as the victim of scheming subordinates and a mentally unstable wife. But the committee wasn't buying it. Not anymore. Not after hours of contradicting testimony. Not after documents and witnesses and Serafina's unflinching honesty. Duke Crow, Lord Westbrook said, his voice cold, this committee finds your testimony unconvincing. Based on the evidence presented, we will be recommending criminal prosecution for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. Additionally, we recommend investigation into the death of Margaret Winters. Alistair's composure finally shattered. You can't do this. I'm a duke. I have rights. You had responsibilities. You failed them spectacularly. Westbrook gathered his papers. This inquiry is adjourned. Duke Crow, you will surrender your passport and remain available for questioning by the Crown Prosecutor. The gavel fell. The chamber erupted. Journalists scrambled for the exits, racing to file their stories. Nobles clustered in groups, already recalculating alliances and distancing themselves from Alistair. And Serafina sat very still, trying to process that it was over. Actually over. She'd won. Or survived, at least. Same thing, maybe. Outside, the crowd was massive. Women who'd followed the inquiry, supporters who'd gathered to show solidarity, even some men who recognized that corruption needed consequences regardless of title. Duchess Crow, someone thrust flowers at her. Thank you for your courage. You saved us all. 3 cheers for the Duchess. The cheering started, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. Serafina felt tears threatening and blinked them back. These people, strangers mostly, treating her like a hero when she'd just been trying to survive. How does it feel? A journalist called out. To have brought down one of the most powerful men in England? Serafina paused, considered the question. I didn't bring him down. He brought himself down. I just refused to be buried with him. The quote would be in every newspaper by morning. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and public spectacle. Alistair was formally charged, his assets frozen, his title under review. Other nobles implicated in the fraud scheme scrambled to make deals, turning on each other with the speed of rats fleeing a sinking ship. Lord Ashbourne kept his immunity, though his reputation never recovered. Lyra left for France as planned, disappeared into a new life under a different name, and Serafina finally, officially, filed for annulment. The proceedings were quick. With Alistair facing criminal charges, nobody wanted to fight about the marriage. The church granted the annulment on grounds of fraud, since the marriage had been based on illegal financial arrangements. 10 years erased with a signature. Serafina stood in the courthouse holding the annulment decree and felt nothing and everything simultaneously. Relief, loss, grief for what she'd thought her life would be, hope for what it might become. "You're free," Mrs. Finch said, signing the final papers. "Legally, financially, completely free." Free. The word still felt foreign. The settlement was generous. Alistair's lawyers had agreed to almost anything to avoid further scandal. £10,000 annually, enough to live comfortably without anyone's support. Her father's estate returned, the mortgage paid off with seized Crow assets that proved legitimate upon investigation. She could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. 6 months after the inquiry, Serafina stood in the drawing room of her father's estate, her estate now, legally hers, and barely recognized the place. She'd spent the last months clearing out reminders of Alistair's influence, redecorating, making it her own. The house felt lighter now, brighter, like it was breathing again after years of holding its breath. "It's beautiful," Catherine said, arriving for tea along with the Duchess of Havershire and several other women who'd become unlikely friends through the scandal. "You've transformed it." "I've transformed myself." Serafina poured tea with steady hands. "The house just reflects that." "Have you heard?" the Duchess asked. "Crow's trial starts next month. They're expecting it to last weeks." "I know. The prosecutor wants me to testify again." "Will you?" Serafina considered. "No. I've said everything I needed to say. The rest is between him and the law." She set down her teacup. "I'm done letting Alistair Crow define my life, even as his victim." "Wise." The Duchess smiled. "So what will you do instead, now that you're free?" "I've been thinking about that." Serafina pulled out papers she'd been working on. "I want to start something, a fund for women trying to leave bad marriages. Legal support, financial assistance, housing if they need it, everything I had that most women don't." Catherine's eyes widened. "Sarah, that's brilliant, but also enormous. The cost alone. I have $10,000 annually and nothing to spend it on except myself, which sounds boring." Serafina felt excitement building. "I've already talked to Mrs. Finch about the legal structure, and the Duchess has connections to housing organizations. We could actually do this." "We absolutely could," the Duchess said, her voice warm with approval. "And we should. Heaven knows enough women need it." They spent the afternoon planning, identifying needs, potential allies, opposition they'd face from men who liked their wives dependent. It felt like the Ashbourne ball all over again, except this time they were building something instead of destroying it. Later, after everyone left, Serafina walked through her house alone. The silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt peaceful. Hers. She ended up in what used to be Alistair's study, now her library. Books she'd chosen lined the walls. A desk she'd purchased sat by the window. No traces of him remained except in her memory, and even those were fading. The newspaper on her desk carried news of his trial, delayed again, his lawyers scrambling. They'd probably delay for months, years maybe, hoping public interest would fade. But Serafina knew it wouldn't. Too many people had been watching, had seen what was possible when someone refused to stay silent. Change was slow, but it was happening. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Her housekeeper, a woman she'd hired herself, not inherited from the Crow household. "A visitor, ma'am. Says she needs help. Something about a husband who won't let her leave." Serafina's heart clenched. "Show her in, and ask Mrs. Finch to come by tomorrow. I think we'll need legal advice." The woman who entered was young, maybe 25, with bruises she'd tried to hide with powder and a determination in her eyes that Serafina recognized immediately. "Duchess Crow? I heard what you did, how you fought back. And I thought—" The woman's voice broke. "I thought maybe you could help me do the same." Serafina gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything. We'll figure it out together." As the woman began her story, familiar and heartbreaking and infuriating all at once, Serafina felt something settle in her chest. Purpose. Not just surviving anymore, but helping others survive too. This was what freedom meant. Not just escaping your own cage, but coming back with bolt cutters for everyone else's. The trial, when it finally happened, lasted 7 weeks. Serafina didn't attend. She'd meant what she said about moving forward, but she read the newspaper accounts, tracked the verdict. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in prison, his title stripped, his fortune seized to repay victims and fund restitution. Alistair Crowe, the man who'd thought himself untouchable, led away in chains. Serafina felt satisfaction, but not joy. Too much damage had been done. Too many lives hurt. Margaret Winters was still dead. Women were still trapped in marriages they couldn't escape. One conviction didn't fix a broken system, but it was a start. A year after the Ashbourne Ball, Serafina hosted her own event, a fundraising gala for the Women's Legal Defense Fund she'd established. The ballroom of her estate was packed with supporters, donors, women who'd benefited from the fund's services. Catherine found her on the terrace, escaping the crowd for a moment. "This is incredible, Sarah. You've helped over 50 women in just 1 year." 53. Serafina couldn't keep the pride from her voice. "Mrs. Finch says we're getting inquiries from across the country, women who heard about the fund, who need help. You've started a movement. I've started a conversation about whether women should have to trade their dignity for security, about whether perfect marriages built on lies are worth maintaining." Serafina looked back through the windows at the party inside. "I don't know if I've changed anything permanently, but I've changed something." "You've changed yourself. That counts." Catherine was right. The woman standing on this terrace, confident, independent, unafraid, bore little resemblance to the perfect Duchess who'd walked into the Ashbourne Ball a year ago. That woman had been so focused on maintaining appearances that she'd forgotten to have substance. This woman had both, and refused to apologize for either. "Duchess Crowe?" A young woman approached hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to thank you. Your fund helped me leave my husband last month. I'm starting over, and it's terrifying, but it's also, I get to choose now. That matters." "It matters more than anything," Serafina said. "And you're not starting over. You're starting fresh. There's a difference." After the woman left, Catherine raised her glass. "To starting fresh." Serafina clinked her glass against Catherine's. "To refusing to accept what we're given. To fighting back. To winning." They drank, watching the party through the windows, women laughing and networking and supporting each other, building something new from the wreckage of the old. Later, alone in her bedroom, Serafina found herself at the window, looking out over gardens she'd redesigned, land she owned outright, a future she'd carved from scandal and survival. The crimson dress from the Ashbourne Ball hung in her closet. She'd kept it, a reminder of the night everything changed. Sometimes she took it out, ran her fingers over the fabric, remembered how terrified she'd been walking into that ballroom, how brave she'd had to become to walk out of it. The bruises on her wrist had faded months ago, but she remembered them. Remembered every threat, every moment of fear, every time she'd almost given up. She'd survived. More than survived. She'd won. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to build a new life. Enough to help others build theirs. Enough to prove that perfect wasn't necessary. Just brave. Just honest. Just willing to fight when fighting seemed impossible. Serafina Crowe, no longer Duchess, no longer perfect, no longer invisible, looked at her reflection in the darkened window and smiled. She'd been a wife, then a scandal, then a survivor. Now? Now she was something else entirely. She was free, and she was just getting started. Outside, the city glittered under stars, full of women who needed help and allies willing to give it, full of possibilities and second chances and futures waiting to be written. Serafina turned from the window, ready to write hers. The perfect Duchess was dead. Long live the Queen.